Why is it that more than 1.5 billion Muslims, followers of one prophet, one book, and one God, are divided across a line that was drawn more than 1,300 years ago? Why does this ancient division between Sunni and Shia still echo through mosques, media, and political movements today? To understand the real truth, we need to go back to the very beginning, the moments of deep devotion, loyalty, ambition, and heartbreak, moments that would shape the fate of the Islamic world forever. This is not a story about dry theology. It is a human story of companions who stood shoulder to shoulder in battle of families, bound by love and blood, and of a question that no one wanted to face after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, who would lead the Muslim Ummah. The answer to this question would not only divide people into Sunni and Shia, but would set off a ripple effect that would span continents and centuries. To truly understand this schism, we must peel back the layers of time and look closely at what happened during those first critical years after the Prophet's passing, when the Prophet Muhammad delivered his message to the people of Mecca and later Medina. His role was clear. He was not only a messenger of God, but also the leader of the growing Muslim community. His wisdom, his justice, his guidance held the people together. No one could dispute his leadership. But as the years passed and his health began to fade, an unspoken tension grew among his companions. Who would lead when he was gone? Unlike a monarchy, there was no clear process for succession in this new community. Muhammad was not a king. He had never crowned an heir. But leadership, political and spiritual, was essential for unity. The question was left unresolved, and beneath the surface, opinions began to form. Some believed that the new leader should be chosen through consensus, selecting the most capable and trusted among the Prophet's companions. Others believed that God had already chosen the successor, that leadership should stay within the Prophet's own family. Central to this belief was the figure of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Ali was no ordinary man in the early Muslim community. He was the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, married to his beloved daughter Fatima. But more than family ties, Ali was renowned for his bravery, his knowledge, and his unwavering loyalty. He was among the first to embrace Islam as a child, and he stood beside the Prophet in every battle, risking his life countless times. His wisdom in matters of faith and law was unmatched. Many saw in Ali the natural continuation of the Prophet's legacy, a leader who would preserve both the spirit and the letter of Islam. Yet, others feared that concentrating leadership in one family might lead to dynastic rule, something Muhammad himself had never endorsed. The Prophet's own humility and rejection of worldly power made many of his companions wary of such a path. It was during this uncertain time, shortly before his passing, that Muhammad stopped at a place called Ghadir while returning from his final pilgrimage. In front of thousands, he held up Ali's hand and declared, "For whomever I am his Mawla." Ali is also his Mawla. The word Mawla, rich with meaning, could be interpreted as protector, friend, or master. What did the Prophet intend? Was this a symbolic gesture honoring Ali's loyalty, or a public appointment of his successor? Among those who would later call themselves Shia, the message was clear. This was an appointment, divinely guided. Among others, the meaning was less certain, a gesture of respect, yes, but not an explicit political command. And so, when the Prophet passed away in 630 CE, grief swept across the Muslim world, but so did uncertainty. The community was left without a clear roadmap for what would happen next. The need for leadership was urgent. The unity of the Ummah was at stake, but there was no consensus on how to proceed. The companions were torn between love for the Prophet's family and the practical need for stability. It was here, in this moment of raw emotion and looming crisis, that the seeds of division were planted, seeds that would grow into the Sunni-Shia split, shaping Islamic history forever. Shortly before the Prophet's final days, an event occurred that would echo across generations, a moment that even now remains at the heart of the Sunni-Shia divide. As the Prophet and tens of thousands of Muslims returned from the farewell pilgrimage, the caravan stopped at a place called Ghadir. The searing sun beat down on the assembled crowd as the Prophet called for the Muslims to gather. Standing before them, he raised Ali's hand and declared, "For whomever I am his Mawla." Ali is also his Mawla. The word Mawla was laden with meaning: master, protector, friend, patron. The companions listened intently, but interpretations varied. Some heard a simple affirmation of Ali's close bond with the Prophet. Others heard something far greater, a public designation of Ali as the Prophet's successor. Among the Prophet's family and many early followers, the significance was unmistakable. For them, this was a divinely sanctioned announcement that leadership should pass to Ali. In their eyes, The Prophet had prepared the Ummah for a continuation of both spiritual and political guidance through his family. Yet, for other companions, especially the elder statesmen among them, the moment was not so clear. The idea of hereditary leadership clashed with their vision of a community, guided by mutual consultation and consensus. After all, the Prophet had spent his life rejecting worldly kingship. Many believed leadership should be entrusted to the most capable, regardless of family ties. In the days that followed, the Prophet's health declined rapidly. Tensions began to rise beneath the surface. In the Prophet's final illness, as he lay surrounded by companions, he is said to have requested pen and paper to record instructions that would safeguard the Ummah from division. According to many reports, one of his closest companions, Umar ibn al-Khattab, intervened, suggesting that the Quran alone was sufficient guidance. This incident, later known as the pen and paper episode, left a wound in the hearts of many of the Prophet's family. For them, it was a missed opportunity to secure clear instructions and avoid future discord. For others, it was simply a moment of confusion amid overwhelming grief. No explicit successor was named in those final hours. When the Prophet passed away, the Ummah was plunged into mourning, but also into a leadership crisis. As the Prophet's family prepared for the burial rites, a separate meeting was hastily convened in Medina, a shaded courtyard known as Saqifa. Many of the Prophet's closest companions were absent, occupied with their own grief or unaware of the gathering. The ants of the Muslims of Medina, who had supported Muhammad from the earliest days, had convened to discuss leadership. They believed that one of their own should guide the community. But soon, representatives of the Muhajirun, those who had immigrated from Mecca, arrived. Among them were Abu Bakr and Umar. The discussions grew heated, emotions running high. No clear process or precedent existed. Then, in a pivotal moment, Abu Bakr proposed a solution. Rather than divide the community, they should unite under a single leader. He offered Umar or another trusted companion as candidates. But Umar quickly pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr, followed by others in the assembly. Word spread rapidly. By the time many of the Prophet's family, including Ali, heard what had transpired, Abu Bakr had already been recognized as the first caliph. For those who would become Sunni, this was a practical and necessary decision, a move to preserve unity. At a time of immense uncertainty, the Prophet's closest friend and confidant, Abu Bakr, was a wise choice, deeply respected and capable of leading the fledgling Ummah. But for those who would become Shia, the events at Saqifa were a betrayal of the Prophet's intent. To them, Ali, whose loyalty, knowledge, and divine appointment at Ghadir seemed unquestionable, had been sidelined. The fact that the meeting took place without the consultation of the Prophet's family or many of his closest companions only deepened the grievance. Ali himself refrained from immediately pledging allegiance, focusing instead on honoring the Prophet's burial. Tensions simmered. Some reports suggest that pressure was later brought upon Ali to accept the new leadership, an act that he eventually did, but not without lingering bitterness. The divide had begun, not yet a full schism, but the foundation had been laid. Over time, these moments, Ghadir, the pen and paper episode, and the gathering at Saqifa, would be interpreted through very different lenses, shaping to distinct narratives of Islamic history. What had started as political tension would evolve into theological divergence, with each side convinced of the righteousness of its cause. And so, the stage was set for a division that would shape the Muslim world for centuries to come. Ali's decision to eventually pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr remains one of the most debated moments in Islamic history. In the weeks following the Prophet's burial, deep tensions simmered beneath the surface of the growing Muslim community. Many of the Prophet's closest relatives and companions, particularly among the Banu Hashim clan, felt sidelined by the events at Saqifa. The emotions were raw and the wounds fresh. Ali, who had remained focused on caring for the Prophet's family and completing his burial rites, was now placed in an impossible position. To resist the newly formed leadership might plunge the fragile Muslim Ummah into open conflict at a time when unity was desperately needed. Yet, to accept it without question would be to surrender what many believe was his rightful place. According to Shia accounts, the pressure on Ali became immense. Some sources even speak of heated confrontations, threats, and force being used to secure his public allegiance. Sunni traditions, however, frame Ali's eventual pledge as an act of wisdom and selflessness, a recognition of the need for communal harmony over personal grievance. Whichever version one accepts, what is clear is that Ali's choice helped avert civil war at that critical juncture. The Prophet's companions, now led by Abu Bakr, worked quickly to consolidate authority and preserve the unity of the young Muslim state. Yet, even with Ali's reluctant acceptance, the divisions were not erased. The differing views of leadership, whether it should be determined by consensus or divine appointments, remained unresolved beneath the surface. The subsequent caliphs, Umar and Uthman, would rule during a period of rapid expansion, with Islam spreading far beyond Arabia. But with this expansion came new challenges, growing wealth, shifting power structures, and simmering resentment. Ali remained a figure of immense respect as scholar, warrior, and advisor. He participated in many key moments of state building, but tensions with the ruling elite, particularly during Uthman's caliphate, became increasingly apparent. Ali's supporters watched with frustration as the ideals of justice and equity, so central to the Prophet's vision, seemed compromised by political interests and favoritism within the ruling class. When Uthman was eventually assassinated by rebellious factions angry over widespread corruption and injustice, the Muslim world was once again thrown into turmoil. The community looked to Ali, the one man whose reputation for piety and integrity remained untainted. Reluctantly, Ali accepted the caliphate not for personal ambition, but because he saw the desperate need for rightful leadership. Yet, from the start, his role was challenged. Key figures, including Aisha, the Prophet's widow, and Muawiyah, the powerful governor of Syria and kinsman of the slain Uthman, refused to accept his authority. The demand for vengeance for Uthman's death became a rallying cry for opposition forces. The cracks in the Ummah widened, and the first Muslim civil war known as the First Fitna began. The first great clash of this war came at the Battle of the Camel. In a tragic twist of fate, Aisha herself led the opposing forces, accompanied by seasoned companions like Talha and Zubair. Though they had once stood united, old allies now faced each other on the battlefield. The fighting was fierce and bloody. Ultimately, all his forces prevailed, yet the victory brought no peace. The wounds of brother fighting brother ran deep. Worse still, a far greater challenge awaited. Muawiyah, from his base in Syria, refused to acknowledge Ali's leadership. Unlike Aisha, Muawiyah commanded vast resources and legions of loyal troops. His defiance was both political and personal. He demanded justice for Uthman's murder, but also sought to preserve and expand his own power. The stage was set for one of the most consequential confrontations in Islamic history, the Battle of Siffin. The battle at Siffin was a brutal, drawn-out affair. Both sides suffered heavy losses, but just as Ali's forces seemed poised for victory, a cunning tactic shifted the course of events. Muawiyah's men raised copies of the Quran on their spears, calling for arbitration. To continue fighting would risk being seen as warring against the very word of God. Many in Ali's camp, weary and spiritually torn, urged him to accept the call for arbitration. Against his better judgment, Ali agreed. The resulting arbitration process proved disastrous. Manipulated by political forces, it produced no clear resolution, only deepened the divisions. Many of Ali's own supporters, disillusioned by what they saw as a betrayal of divine justice, broke away to form the radical Kharijite movement. The caliphate was now fractured beyond repair. The final blow came when Ali, already weakened by years of conflict and intrigue, was assassinated by a Kharijite zealot. His death marked the end of the era of the rightly guided caliphs. Though his eldest son, Hazan, briefly assumed leadership, political pressure soon forced him into a treaty with Muawiyah, hoping to preserve a fragile peace. Hazan agreed to abdicate on the condition that leadership would not be inherited, but Muawiyah would not honor that promise. Upon his death, he named his son Yazid as successor, turning the caliphate into a dynastic monarchy. The seeds of discontent now burst into flames. Hussein, the younger son of Ali and grandson of the Prophet, refused to pledge allegiance to Yazid. For Hussein and his followers, this was not merely political, it was a matter of truth versus tyranny. In their eyes, Yazid's rule represented corruption, injustice, and the betrayal of the Prophet's vision. Hussein's refusal set in motion the events that would lead to the most tragic and defining moment for Shia Islam, the Battle of Karbala. Hussein and his small band of loyal followers, men, women, and children, set out from Mecca, answering calls for support from the people of Kufa in Iraq, but Yazid's forces intercepted them on the barren plains of Karbala. Vastly outnumbered, cut off from water, and facing certain death, Hussein stood firm. Over several agonizing days, the standoff became a test of faith, honor, and resistance against tyranny. Hussein's companions fell one by one. On the 10th day of Muharram, known forever as Ashura, Hussein himself was slain. His body, along with those of his male relatives, was mutilated. The surviving women and children were taken captive. The martyrdom of Hussein at Karbala became a watershed moment in Islamic history. For the Shia, It was the ultimate symbol of sacrifice, standing for truth even in the face of overwhelming injustice. The story of Karbala is not merely a historical memory, it is a living narrative, evoked in rituals of mourning, in poetry, in tears. It is the beating heart of Shia identity, a call to resist oppression in all forms. But even beyond Shia circles, the tragedy of Karbala resonated deeply among many Sunni Muslims too. Hussein's courage and the injustice of Yazid's actions were mourned. Yet the political forces of the time ensured that the divisions once rooted in a question of succession had now grown into something far deeper and enduring, a schism of identity, practice, and belief that would continue to shape the Muslim world for centuries to come. In the years that followed the tragedy of Karbala, the path of Islam began to diverge even more clearly into two streams of faith, shaped by differing views of leadership, justice, and history. On one side, the Sunni tradition solidified around the principle that leadership should be determined by the consensus of the community. They revered the first for Caliphs Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali as the rightly guided caliphs, examples of righteous rule even if imperfect. The Sunnis emphasized unity, order, and stability, viewing these as essential to preserving the Muslim Ummah. On the other side, the Shia tradition rooted itself in the belief that leadership of the Muslim community was a divinely guided role meant to remain within the Prophet's family, the Al-Bayt. For Shia Muslims, Ali and his descendants, the Imams, were not merely political leaders, but spiritual ones, imbued with divine wisdom and moral authority. They saw the events at Ghadir, the sidelining of Ali, and the martyrdom of Hussein as part of a larger narrative of injustice against the rightful custodians of Islam. Over time, these differing views evolved into distinct religious practices, legal interpretations, and forms of communal life. Sunni and Shia scholars developed their own schools of jurisprudence, their own traditions of hadith, and unique ways of commemorating history. For Sunnis, the focus remained on the collective unity of the Ummah. For Shia Muslims, a deep reverence for the suffering and sacrifice of the Prophet's family became central to faith, expressed powerfully in rituals of remembrance, especially during Muharram. But the divergence between Sunni and Shia was not driven solely by theology. The politics of empire played a decisive role. As the Umayyad dynasty cemented its power, ruling from Damascus, and later the Abbasids from Baghdad, the line between religious legitimacy and political ambition became increasingly blurred. Many rulers used religion to bolster their authority, often marginalizing or persecuting those who held Shia beliefs. In response, Shia communities often withdrew, nurturing a distinct identity rooted in resistance, patience, and devotion to the Imams. Periods of persecution hardened the lines between Sunni and Shia, but they also deepened the spiritual and emotional dimensions of Shia Islam. Meanwhile, Sunni Islam became the dominant tradition across the expanding Muslim world, supported by the political power of successive empires. Yet despite their differences, Sunnis and Shia remain connected by shared core beliefs, the oneness of God, the finality of the Prophet's message, the centrality of the Quran, and the pillars of faith. As centuries passed, the divide ebbed and flowed, sometimes flaring into violence, other times coexisting peacefully. Political forces often exploited sectarian identities for their own ends, and regional dynamics added new layers of complexity. The Safavid Empire in Persia embraced Shia Islam as a state religion, while the Ottoman Empire championed Sunni orthodoxy. These rival empires locked in political and military conflict, further entrenching the schism. In the modern era, colonial interventions, the carving of artificial borders, and the rise of nation-states layered new tensions onto old grievances. Today, in places like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and beyond, the Sunni-Shia divide is often portrayed in simplistic terms as though it were an unchanging ancient feud. But the truth is far more complex. Political ambitions, economic disparities, foreign interference, all these forces have manipulated sectarian identities for power. And yet, beneath the headlines, millions of Sunnis and Shia continue to live side by side, sharing neighborhoods, mosques, markets, and often bonds of family. The question remains, can this ancient schism, so deeply rooted in history, be healed? Across the Muslim world, many voices, scholars, leaders, ordinary believers call for a return to the shared essence of Islam. They point out that the core message of the Prophet was unity, compassion, and justice. That Sunnis and Shia, for all their historical differences, still stand on common ground: belief in one God, reverence for the Prophet, devotion to prayer, fasting, charity, and pilgrimage. They argue that understanding the origins of the divide is not about reopening old wounds, but about learning from history, by facing the past honestly, by honoring the sacrifices made on all sides. Perhaps the Muslim world can move toward greater unity not by erasing differences, but by respecting them and focusing on the higher ideals that bind the faithful together. In the end, the story of the Sunni-Shia schism is not just about the past. It is a living story, one that continues to shape the present and the future. And for those who seek a more just and united Ummah, understanding this story is not optional. It is an essential first step toward building the kind of world the Prophet himself would have wished for his followers.